The air in the obsidian arena tasted like iron and ozone. Kale took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his makeshift armor. Really just a patchwork of salvage tech and protective materials, pressing against his chest. Through the visor of his helmet, he watched the crowd roar with anticipation, their faces blurring into a sea of alien features. They had come to see blood. His blood, specifically. 5 minutes until commencement. A mechanical voice announced over the arena's sound system. Challenger Kale versus Champion Lyra. Kale closed his eyes, thinking of home, of the colony's darkened corridors, air purifiers struggling against the biocontaminant that had begun ravaging the population 6 months ago. Children with gray skin and labored breathing filled the medical facilities. Engineers worked around the clock to maintain life support systems designed to last decades, not centuries. Without intervention, his people would not survive another year. The Starheart was their only hope, an ancient power source of legendary capabilities, capable of purifying an entire planetary atmosphere or powering a colony for millennia. And somehow, impossibly, the path to finding it led here, to this gladiatorial spectacle on a distant world, where victory against an undefeated champion would grant him the right to demand anything. Seems like a fool's gambit, Kale muttered to himself, checking the energy reserves on his custom-built disruptor one last time. The device was small, unassuming, easily overlooked, exactly as he designed it. The announcer's voice boomed again. For 63 consecutive matches, she has stood undefeated. The pride of Xylos, bound by the ancient oath, destroyer of challengers, the unmatched warrior, El-Ray. The crowd's roar became deafening as a figure emerged from the far gate. Kale studied her carefully, tall, lithe, and undeniably powerful. Her skin held a faint silvery sheen beneath the arena lights, marking her as one of the genetically enhanced Astrari, an ancient race known for their physical prowess and connection to cosmic energies. Lyra wore minimal armor, seemingly confident in her natural abilities. Her movements were precise, economical, almost mechanical in their perfection. But what caught Kale's attention most was her expression, or rather, the lack of one. Her eyes scanned the arena with cold detachment, as if the coming battle was merely an inconvenience to be dealt with efficiently. And now, our challenger, a human from the outer colonies, with no notable combat record or enhancements. Spectators, place your bets on how long he'll last against our champion. Will it be 30 seconds? A full minute? Let's welcome Kale. Laughter rippled through the crowd as Kale stepped forward. The odds displayed on the massive screens showed numbers so astronomical against him that they seemed almost comical. He ignored them, focusing instead on Lyra, who now stood in the center of the arena, her gaze finally settling on him. No recognition, no emotion, just clinical assessment. Fighters approach for the oath, the announcer commanded. Kale walked forward, each step measured, already conserving energy for what was to come. As they met in the center, a ceremonial attendant approached, carrying an ornate sphere that pulsed with eerie blue light. Champion Lyra, reaffirm your oath, the attendant intoned. Lyra placed her hand on the sphere, which flared brighter at her touch. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and resonant, yet devoid of inflection. By the ancient compact I stand bound. Should any defeat me in fair combat, I shall call the master and obey their will in all things. Such is the price of my power, such is the burden of my station. The crowd fell momentarily silent. This was the part that made the Obsidian Arena infamous throughout the galaxy. Not just combat, but the absolute servitude of the defeated champion. Many fighters had refused the final bout rather than risk such bondage. Others sought it specifically for the power it would grant them over a warrior of Lyra's caliber. Challenger Kale, do you understand the terms of this combat? Victory grants you mastery over the champion until you are defeated in turn or release her from service. Kale placed his hand on the sphere, feeling a strange vibration course through him. I understand. Then let combat commence. The attendant withdrew, scurrying to safety beyond the arena boundaries. Lyra didn't waste time with words. The moment the signal sounded, she moved, a blur of silver and purpose, crossing the distance between them faster than seemed possible. Kale barely activated his shield projector in time, the energy barrier flickering into existence milliseconds before her fist connected. Even deflected, the force of the blow sent him skidding backward, his boots leaving deep grooves in the arena floor. Predictable, he whispered to himself, activating the first of his traps, a series of microsensors he'd scattered across the arena floor during his entrance. They began mapping Lyra's movements, feeding data to his helmet display. Her next attack came from above, a leap that carried her 20 meters into the air before she descended like a meteor. Kale rolled aside, the impact crater where he'd stood testament to what would have happened had he been there. His analytical mind registered the energy signature of her attack, correlating it with the footage he'd studied for weeks. Pattern Alpha 3, he mumbled, adjusting his tactics accordingly. For 3 excruciating minutes, Kale executed his survival strategy, avoiding direct confrontation, using the arena's terrain features for cover, deploying countermeasures that confused but never truly threatened Lyra. The crowd's initial mockery turned to a grudging appreciation for his tenacity, though few believed he could last much longer. Lyra's expression remained unchanged, but her attacks grew more precise, more efficient, conserving energy as she systematically eliminated his options for evasion. Corner by corner, section by section, she was cutting off his retreat. "Is running all you can do, human?" she finally spoke, her voice carrying easily across the arena. "Your kind always relies on delay tactics when faced with superior force." Kale didn't respond, saving his breath. His sensors indicated his shield energy was down to 30%. 3 of his 7 prepared devices had been deployed. The statistical models running in his helmet showed his survival probability dropping by the second. But he'd gathered enough data now. The pattern recognition software he'd programmed had identified something critical, a microsecond delay between Lyra's energy channeling and physical execution when performing her most devastating attacks. A vulnerability so slight that no ordinary combatant would ever notice it, let alone exploit it. "Time to test the hypothesis," he muttered, dropping into a stance that intentionally mimicked fear and exhaustion. Lyra took the bait, charging her energy for a finishing move, a signature attack the crowds had named Star Death for its brilliant white energy and inevitability. As the power built around her fists, Kale activated his disruptor, aimed not at Lyra herself, but the precise spot her energy would focus in that fraction of a second delay. When she unleashed the attack, the disruptor fired. Not a weapon, but a precisely calibrated energy pulse designed to resonate with and disrupt her own energy signature. The resulting feedback loop was instantaneous and devastating. Lyra's attack collapsed in on itself. The energy she'd gathered rebounded through her system, momentarily overloading her enhanced biology. She staggered, her perfect composure shattered for the first time as confusion and pain flashed across her features. Kale didn't waste the opportunity. He charged forward, deploying his final device, a gravity modulator that briefly multiplied the local gravitational force. As Lyra struggled against her own disrupted energy and the sudden crushing weight, Kale reached her and placed a simple blade against her throat. "Yield," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The arena fell absolutely silent. Lyra's eyes, silver-flecked and now wide with disbelief, met his. For a moment, he thought she might refuse, might break the ancient oath rather than accept defeat. Then slowly she nodded. "I yield," she said, the words seemingly forced from her lips against her will. The silence stretched for another heartbeat before the announcer's stunned voice filled the arena. "The champion has been defeated. Kale is victorious." Chaos erupted in the stands. Some spectators celebrated the astronomical payouts from their unlikely bets. Others howled in outrage, certain some trickery had occurred. The nobles of Xylos whispered urgently among themselves, their plans suddenly thrown into disarray. As the gravity modulator deactivated, Kale stepped back, lowering his blade. Lyra rose to her feet with preternatural grace despite her defeat. Her face had returned to its emotionless mask, but something new burned in her eyes as she looked at him. Something between hatred and curiosity. Then, as the ancient oath compelled her, she knelt before him, her movement fluid yet somehow mechanical, as if her body acted against her mind's wishes. "Master," she said, the word hollow and cold. "What would you have of me?" Kale felt no triumph, only a strange emptiness and discomfort at the power now thrust upon him. But he thought of home, of dying children and failing systems, and steeled himself. "Tell me everything you know about the Starheart," he said quietly, so only she could hear. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed her features before vanishing. "Follow me," she replied, rising. "There are many ears here that should not hear such things." The luxury quarters assigned to the Obsidian Champion were larger than the entire living section of Kale's colony ship. Ornate carvings covered walls of actual stone, a ridiculous extravagance in space, while gravity-defying water features created impossible cascades between levels of the multi-tiered living space. Kale paced uncomfortably, still in his battle-worn armor minus the helmet, while Lyra stood motionless near the center of the main chamber, watching him with that same unsettling, emotionless gaze. "You should know that we are being monitored," she said finally, breaking the silence. The arena hierarch never truly leaves champions to their own devices, regardless of the ancient oath's provisions. Kale nodded. "I expected as much. Is there anywhere we can speak privately?" "You need only command it, Master." The title came out precisely, each syllable articulated with subtle emphasis that somehow made it sound like an accusation rather than acknowledgement. Kale winced at the word. "Don't call me that when it's just us. The oath requires it." "Then the oath can be bent a little." "My name is Kale. Use it." Lyra tilted her head slightly, the first truly spontaneous gesture he'd seen from her. "As you wish." "Kale." She moved toward one of the doorways. "There's a bathing chamber with sound-dampening features. The water systems interfere with most surveillance." As they entered the steaming chamber, Kale noticed Lyra's posture change subtly, a slight relaxation, as if crossing the threshold freed her from some invisible constraint. "You are not what I expected," she said, activating several water features that filled the room with a gentle roar of artificial waterfalls. "Most who seek to defeat me want power, wealth, or—" she gestured at herself, "other satisfactions. I need information, and potentially your help," Kale replied, carefully removing pieces of his damaged armor. "The Starheart is not a power source or artifact, as commonly believed," Lyra interrupted. "At least, not precisely." Kale froze. "What?" "It is a stellar phenomenon, a rare, cosmic event that occurs in specific regions where dimensional barriers thin." She studied his reaction. "You truly believed it was some device you could simply take back to your colony?" All the ancient texts described it as. Metaphorically, yes. The heart of a star, caged in crystal, burning, eternal. Poetry, not specification. For the first time, something like amusement flickered in her eyes. "Your people are dying, aren't they? Your colony failing." Kale nodded grimly. "A pathogen, something that emerged from deep ice as the terraforming systems malfunctioned. Our technology can't counter it, and the Central Worlds have abandoned us as too costly to save." Before Lyra could respond, a chime echoed through the chamber, followed by a voice announcing, "Arena Hierarch Vossen requests immediate audience with a new champion." Lyra's expression hardened instantly. "He comes sooner than expected. Be wary, Kale. Vossen sees me as a valuable weapon, not a person bound by oath. He will attempt to separate us or control you." "Can he override the oath?" "No, but there are many ways to manipulate circumstances so that the oath becomes irrelevant." She straightened, her walls visibly coming back up. "How do you wish to proceed?" "Master." Kale considered his options. "We receive him, learn what he wants, but reveal nothing of our intentions." And Lyra, he met her gaze directly. If he threatens either of us, you have my permission to defend us. Not to kill, but to ensure our safety. Something dangerous gleamed in her silver eyes. Understood. Arena hierarch Vossen proved to be every bit the political predator Lyra had suggested. Tall and razor-thin, with skin so pale it was nearly translucent, he entered the champion's quarters with the confidence of one who owned everything and everyone within it, which in many ways he did. Most impressive victory, off-worlder, he said, not bothering with formal introductions. Quite the upset. The gambling syndicates are in chaos. His smile never reached his eyes. Of course, many are claiming technological interference, prohibited weapons, perhaps even outside assistance. I use strategy and observation, Kale replied evenly. Nothing prohibited under arena rules. Of course, Vossen waved dismissively. But you understand these accusations must be investigated thoroughly. Until then, I'm afraid the champion must remain under arena jurisdiction. You may visit, of course, but taking her off-world would be premature. Kale felt Lyra tense beside him, though her face remained impassive. The ancient oath contains no such limitation, Kale said, recalling the exact wording from his research. The champion serves the victor until defeated or released. There is no provision for arena jurisdiction overriding this commitment. Vossen's smile tightened. The oath exists within the context of Xylosian law, which I represent. Surely you wouldn't want to trigger an interplanetary incident? Your colony is already in such precarious standing with the Central Worlds. The threat was barely veiled. Kale maintained his composure, though internally he recalculated his timeline. They needed to leave sooner than he'd planned. Understand your position, Hierarch, he said carefully. Perhaps we can reach a compromise. Allow me 2 days to recover from the match and consider my options regarding the champion's service. Vossen studied him, clearly suspicious of the easy acquiescence, but unable to find fault with the request. Very well. 2 days, during which time, of course, arena security will maintain its usual vigilance. After the hierarch departed, Lyra turned to Kale. We need to leave tonight, she said without preamble. Vossen will never allow you to take me off-world. I am too valuable an asset. Agreed. Can you bypass arena security? A cold smile touched her lips. I've been champion for 7 years. I know every weakness in their systems, every guard rotation, every emergency protocol. They believe the oath makes such knowledge irrelevant, as no champion would act against arena interests without a master's command. And now you have a master with very different interests, Kale mused. Prepare whatever we need. We leave at the facility's low cycle. There is a private vessel in the arena's executive hangar, Lyra said, ostensibly for the hierarch's use, but he rarely travels off-world. It's fast, well-equipped, and has clearance codes that would get us past planetary defense systems with minimal questioning. Kale nodded. Perfect. Now, before we're interrupted again, tell me more about the Starheart. If it's not an artifact I can bring back, how can it help my people? Lyra's expression grew distant. The Starheart phenomenon occurs at coordinates I know well. When a star reaches a specific vibrational frequency across dimensional barriers, its energy can be harnessed in ways your science would consider impossible. It can restructure matter at its most fundamental level, including living organisms. You're saying it could purge the pathogen from my people? From our world? If properly channeled, yes. But reaching it requires navigating the drift, a region of space where normal physics becomes negotiable. She focused on him with sudden intensity. This is why Vossen and the other power brokers of Xylos want me. My species evolved in the gravitational shadow of such phenomena. I can navigate the drift where others would be lost forever. So we steal a ship, navigate to this Starheart, and somehow use it to save my colony, Kale summarized. Simple enough. For the first time, Lyra made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it held little warmth. Your species' talent for understatement is remarkable. It's called hope, Lyra. Sometimes it's all we have. She regarded him with that tilted head curiosity again. Hope. An interesting concept. We shall see if it survives contact with the drift. Stealing the Hierarch's personal vessel proved both easier and more complicated than Kale had anticipated. Easier because Lyra's knowledge of arena systems was comprehensive, allowing them to bypass security measures with minimal effort. More complicated because they encountered not just the expected guards, but evidence of Vassen's distrust, additional security personnel positioned along their escape route. He suspected we would run, Kale whispered as they crouched behind a cargo container, watching a patrol pass. He knows the value of what he nearly lost, Lyra replied. The Hierarch has been trying to force me to navigate the drift for him for years. The oath prevented him from compelling me directly, but he's been seeking a champion he could control to give the order. What's in the drift that he wants so badly? Power, weapons, technologies from civilizations that understood the weave of reality better than any living race. Her silver eyes gleamed in the dim light. There are remnants of empires that ruled when your kind were still grasping basic tools, Kale. Another patrol approached. Lyra tensed, ready to engage if Kale gave a command. Wait, he whispered, studying their pattern. 3 seconds after they pass that junction, we move. No confrontation unless absolutely necessary. They made it to the executive hangar with only one close call, where Lyra had to render a technician unconscious with a precise nerve strike. The ship waited, sleek and predatory, its hull gleaming with an iridescence that suggested advanced materials beyond standard spacefaring technologies. Can you fly this? Kale asked as they approached. Yes, but planetary defense systems will lock on the moment we activate without proper authorization. Kale smiled tightly. That's where this comes in. He produced a small device from his remaining equipment. Modified transponder. It should broadcast emergency override codes for approximately 6 minutes, long enough to clear the defense grid if we move fast. Lyra's eyebrows raised slightly. You came prepared for a very specific escape scenario. I came prepared for many scenarios. This was simply the most likely. The ship's systems recognized Lyra immediately, another advantage they hadn't counted on. Apparently, Vassen had already programmed it to respond to her biometric signature, anticipating the day he would finally control her through a proxy champion. Within moments, they were airborne, the ship slicing through Xylos's upper atmosphere as planetary defense turrets tracked but did not fire, confused by the emergency codes transmitting from their vessel. When the codes failed, as Kale knew they would, they were already accelerating past the orbital defense grid, streaking toward open space. They're dispatching pursuit craft, Lyra announced, her hands dancing across the ship's controls with practiced efficiency. Intercept in approximately 12 minutes. Can we outrun them? Not conventionally. She gave him a sidelong glance. But we could enter the primary jump corridor now rather than at the system boundary. It would be irregular, dangerous, potentially catastrophic, or merely nauseating. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Your choice, Master. Kale winced at the title. Stop calling me that. And do it, the irregular jump. As you wish. Kale. She executed a series of commands, and the stars outside the viewport began to stretch. A shudder ran through the ship, more violent than any jump Kale had experienced before. Warning indicators flashed across every display as the vessel protested the physical impossibilities it was being asked to perform. Is this normal? Kale shouted over the alarming sounds emanating from the ship's structure. Entirely abnormal, Lyra replied with what might have been satisfaction. But effective. The universe seemed to fold around them, reality compressing and expanding in patterns that made Kale's eyes water. Then, with a final violent shudder, they were through, emerging into the serene darkness of deep space, far from Xylos and its pursuit vessels. Lyra allowed herself to relax fractionally. We've escaped immediate capture. Now we need to adjust our course to avoid standard patrol routes and monitoring stations. As she worked, Kale took his first opportunity to truly observe her without the tension of imminent danger. Despite her humanoid appearance, subtle differences marked her Astrari heritage. The silvery undertone to her skin, the unusual fluidity of her movements, the faint luminescence of her eyes when they caught the light at certain angles. She was beautiful in the way dangerous things often are, a perfect predator adapted to her environment. "You're staring," she observed without looking away from her tasks. "I'm trying to understand you," Kale admitted. "The ancient oath, your service as champion, your willingness to help me now. It doesn't add up." Lyra was silent for a long moment. "The oath is binding, but interpretation allows flexibility. You defeated me fairly, using intelligence rather than brute strength. That earns a measure of respect. And the rest. Vasin and his kind have used my people's abilities for generations. The oath was originally meant to ensure Astrari powers were used ethically, binding us to serve only those worthy enough to defeat us." Her expression darkened. Over centuries, it became corrupted into a tool of control, with champions pitted against rigged opponents or worn down through successive challenges. But you remained undefeated. Until you. She finally looked at him directly. "I do not know if you are worthy, Kale of the Dying Colony, but you fight for your people's survival, not personal gain. That, at least, I can respect." The ship's confined quarters forced a proximity that neither of them had anticipated. Designed for the hierarch's comfort rather than long voyages, it featured luxurious accommodations but limited space. They established an uneasy routine as days stretched into weeks, their course taking them through seldom-traveled regions to avoid detection. Kale spent hours in the small command center, analyzing data about the drift and the Starheart phenomenon, occasionally consulting Lyra when he encountered concepts beyond his understanding. She, in turn, maintained the ship's systems with an efficiency that suggested long familiarity with space travel. "Your colony," she said one cycle as they shared a meal in the small galley. "Tell me more about it." Kale looked up in surprise. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation about something other than their mission or the ship's operations. "It was founded 3 generations ago," he said after a moment. "A mining outpost originally, harvesting rare minerals from the planet's mantle. When the primary veins were exhausted, most of the corporation pulled out, but some families had built lives. There, they petitioned for colonization rights, and were granted them, provided they expect no further support," Lyra finished, familiar with how the Central Worlds operated. "A common story. Yes, we managed well enough for a time, developed secondary industries, established trade with nearby systems. Then the terraforming grid began to malfunction." Kale's expression grew distant. "The planet was never fully habitable. We lived in domed structures, controlled environments. When the atmosphere processors started failing, ancient microorganisms emerged from the melting permafrost. Your people were unprepared. Completely. The pathogen attacks neural tissue primarily. Children are most vulnerable. Their developing nervous systems offer less resistance." His hands tightened around his cup. "We've lost 26 children in the past 6 months. Another 43 are in critical condition. The adults show slower progression, but eventually..." He trailed off. Lyra studied him with unreadable eyes. "And you believe the Starheart can rewrite their molecular structure to eliminate this pathogen?" "I believe it's their only hope." He met her gaze. "I've exhausted every other possibility." Something changed in her expression, a softening perhaps, or a new evaluation. "Rest, Kale. I'll take the next navigation shift. We're approaching the boundary of normal space. Soon we'll need to prepare for the drift." Their first true crisis came 3 days later, when a Central Worlds patrol cruiser detected their vessel despite their precautions. The ensuing chase forced them to take refuge in an asteroid field dense enough to confound standard sensors, but dangerous enough to threaten their own survival with each passing moment. "Port stabilizer is damaged," Kale reported, clinging to his station as another impact rocked the ship. "Shields at 63%. Lyra's hands moved with preternatural speed across the controls, guiding them through gaps between tumbling rocks that seemed impossibly small. "We cannot remain here. The patrol is circling the field's perimeter. They can wait us out. Options, limited and unpleasant." She pointed to a dense cluster of asteroids ahead. There's a mining outpost abandoned during the resource wars. Minimal life support still functions according to automated beacons. We could dock, repair, and wait for the patrol to lose interest. Another impact jolted them. Do it, Kale ordered. The outpost proved to be a crumbling relic of a forgotten conflict, its skeletal structure barely visible against the dark surface of a massive asteroid. Automated systems still functioned at minimal capacity, providing basic atmosphere and gravity in the central sections. They docked in a maintenance bay that had clearly not seen use in decades. We need to assess the damage to the stabilizer, Lyra said as they secured the ship. I'll need to go outside. I'll come with you, Kale replied, already reaching for an environment suit. She raised an eyebrow. That isn't necessary. I can operate in vacuum for limited periods. Another Astrari ability? A useful modification. She didn't elaborate. Nevertheless, 2 sets of eyes and hands will make the work go faster. Outside, working in the eerie silence of vacuum, Kale gained a new appreciation for Lyra's capabilities. She moved with perfect confidence in zero gravity, her body seemingly unbothered by the extreme conditions. Together, they assessed the damage, significant but reparable with materials they might scavenge from the abandoned facility. As they worked, a strange companionship developed between them, a rhythm of cooperation that required few words. Kale found himself increasingly aware of her presence, not as the bound champion or even as the key to saving his colony, but as a person of extraordinary complexity and capability. When they finally returned inside, exhausted but successful, Lyra surprised him by asking, "Your people, what will they do if we succeed? If the pathogen is eliminated?" "Rebuild. Continue." Kale removed his helmet, running a hand through sweat-dampened hair. "It's what humans do. And you? What will you do when your mission is complete?" The question caught him off guard. He had been so focused on saving his people that he'd given little thought to what came after. "I don't know," he admitted. "Continue my work as an engineer, I suppose. Help strengthen our infrastructure against future threats." Lyra nodded slowly. "And what of your claim on me?" "The oath binds me to your service until you release me or are defeated." The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address directly. "I won't hold you to it," Kale finally said. "Once we've reached the Star Heart and helped my colony, you'll be free to go where you wish." Something flickered in her silver eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or skepticism. "Just like that? You would surrender such power voluntarily?" "The oath was never my goal, Lyra. It was only ever a means to an end." She studied him for a long moment. "You are unusual, Kale. I'll take that as a compliment." It wasn't meant as one, merely an observation. But there was a new warmth in her voice that belied her words. They remained at the abandoned outpost for 3 days, repairing the ship and monitoring patrol communications. On the second day, it discovered evidence that someone else had used the facility recently. Supplies moved, systems accessed, maintenance logs altered. Pirates, perhaps, Lyra suggested as they investigated the disturbed areas. Or smugglers. This region borders several disputed territories. "Recent?" Kale asked, examining a console that showed signs of recent use. "Within the last month, I would estimate." She froze suddenly, her head tilting in that now familiar gesture of alertness. "We're not alone." Before Kale could respond, an energy blast struck the wall beside them. They dove for cover as more shots followed, revealing at least 3 attackers using the abandoned corridors for concealment. "Scavengers," Lyra said tersely. "They likely detected our approach and hoped to catch us unprepared." "Options?" Kale asked, wincing as another blast superheated the metal barrier they sheltered behind. Lyra's expression turned coldly efficient. "I require your permission to engage with lethal force." Kale hesitated. "Non-lethal, if possible. Lethal only if absolutely necessary." She nodded once, then moved with blinding speed, becoming a silver blur that crossed the open space between cover points faster than the attackers could track. Kale provided what distraction he could, using his limited sidearm to keep the scavengers' attention divided. What followed was a demonstration of Lyra's combat capabilities unrestrained by arena rules. She moved like liquid mercury, flowing around obstacles and attacks, striking with precision that rendered two attackers unconscious before they fully registered her presence. The third managed to land a glancing blow with some kind of shock weapon, momentarily disrupting her movement. Kale saw the attacker raise their weapon for a killing shot and acted without thinking, lunging from cover to tackle Lyra aside. The energy blast passed through the space she had occupied, missing them both by centimeters as they crashed to the floor together. Lyra recovered instantly, flipping their positions to shield Kale with her body as she fired a small energy weapon that had appeared in her hand from some concealed location. The attacker dropped. For a moment, they remained frozen, Lyra protectively covering Kale, their faces inches apart. Something electric passed between them. Awareness, perhaps, or recognition of a boundary crossed. "You risked yourself," Lyra said softly, genuine confusion in her voice. "Why?" "Instinct," Kale replied, acutely aware of her weight against him, the strangely pleasant heat of her skin. "You were in danger. I'm bound to protect you, not the reverse. Maybe I don't see you as just a bound champion anymore." She studied his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. Then, with fluid grace, she rose and extended a hand to help him up. When he took it, her grip was firm, warm, and lingered a fraction longer than necessary. "We should secure the prisoners and prepare to depart," she said, her voice betraying nothing of the moment they had shared. "The patrol will have detected the energy discharges." They left the outpost within hours, the ship repaired and their course set for the boundary of normal space. The three scavengers they had captured were left restrained, but with sufficient supplies and an automated distress beacon programmed to activate after their departure. As they accelerated away from the asteroid field, Kale noticed a subtle change in Lyra's demeanor. A fractional relaxation, occasional glances in his direction when she thought he wasn't looking, and once, startlingly, what might have been a smile when he successfully navigated a particularly complex astrogation calculation. "We'll reach the drift boundary in approximately 12 hours, she announced after one such calculation. "You should rest while you can. The transition will be demanding." "What should I expect?" She considered the question carefully. The drift is not merely another region of space. It exists between conventional dimensions, where physical laws become suggestions rather than requirements. Time, distance, even causality operate differently there. That sounds impossible. By your science, yes. Yet the ancient civilizations navigated it regularly. She tilted her head. It's where the oath originated, in fact. My ancestors were guides through the drift for those who proved worthy of their service. Kale absorbed this new information. How long will we be in the drift? Subjectively or objectively? When he looked confused, she elaborated. "We might experience days while only hours pass in normal space. Or the reverse. The Starheart's location is approximately 3 drift segments from the boundary. With favorable conditions, perhaps a week of subjective time. And unfavorable conditions?" Her expression darkened. "Then we might never emerge at all." The transition into the drift was nothing like Kale had imagined. As they approached the boundary, visible only as a subtle distortion in the starfield ahead, Lyra's demeanor changed. Her movements became more fluid, her eyes taking on a luminescent quality that reminded Kale of stories about ancient mariners navigating by the stars. "Prepare yourself," she warned as her hands danced across the controls with increasing speed. The initial transition is often disorienting. That proved to be a profound understatement. As they crossed the invisible threshold, reality seemed to shatter around them. The viewport showed impossible geometries, stars that stretched into lines, then curved back upon themselves. Colors existed that Kale had no names for, bleeding into each other in patterns that made his eyes water and his mind protest. Worse was the sense of wrongness that permeated everything, as if the fundamental rules that governed existence had suddenly been rewritten in an alien language. Kale felt his consciousness stretching, fragmenting, then reassembling in patterns that seemed both foreign and strangely familiar. He would have screamed if he could have found his voice. Instead, he gripped his seat with white-knuckled intensity, focusing on the one constant in this chaos: Lyra. She remained steady, her expression one of intense concentration as she guided their vessel through the incomprehensible. "Breathe," she commanded, her voice somehow cutting through the distortion. "Focus on my voice. Your mind is trying to interpret sensory input it was never designed to process." Gradually, agonizingly, the worst of the disorientation passed. The universe still looked wrong, but Cale found he could function, could think again in mostly linear fashion. "Ow!" he managed, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "How do you navigate this?" "My species evolved at the boundaries of such places," Lyra replied, her attention still fixed on the controls. "We perceive the patterns within the chaos, the currents and eddies in the flow of possibility." Cale tried to understand what he was seeing outside the viewport. Sometimes it appeared as if they were moving through a nebula of impossible colors. Other times he could swear he saw fragments of landscapes, structures, or even entire worlds flickering at the edges of perception. "Those are echoes," Lyra explained when he asked. "Reflections of places that exist, have existed, or might exist in other dimensional expressions. The drift touches all possibilities simultaneously." Days passed in this hallucinatory landscape, though Cale's time sense became increasingly unreliable. They established a routine, Lyra guiding their vessel for long stretches while Cale monitored systems and provided what assistance he could, then brief periods of rest when the drift's currents permitted. During one such rest period, as they shared a meal in the small galley, Cale found the courage to ask a question that had been troubling him. "The oath that binds you. You said it originated here, in the drift. What is its true purpose? Not the arena's corruption, but its original intent." Lyra was silent for a long moment, her silver eyes distant. "The Astrari were once guardians of the spaces between dimensions. Our abilities made us uniquely suited to guide others through the drift, to access places of power like the Star Heart." She traced a pattern on the table's surface with one finger. "But such power attracts corruption. Some of my ancestors began demanding payment for their services. Not just resources, but servitude from those they guided. Others refused to guide worthy travelers because they disagreed with their purposes. So the oath was created as a check against abuse," Cale concluded. "Yes, a compact between guide and guided. Only those who prove themselves worthy through fair challenge could command an Astrari service." Her mouth twisted in a bitter smile. Over millennia, as the drift became less traveled and the old empires fell, the oath was twisted, turned from a sacred duty into a chain of bondage for entertainment and profit. "How many of your people remain?" "Few, perhaps a dozen scattered across known space. Most, like me, bound by corrupted versions of the oath." She looked up at him suddenly. "You could have commanded anything of me after your victory. Servitude, loyalty, even—" She hesitated. "Intimacy. Why ask only for guidance to the Starheart?" Cale felt heat rise to his face. "Because coerced service isn't service at all. It's slavery. I needed your knowledge. Yes, but forcing you beyond that would make me no better than Vossen or any other. Exploiter." Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a reassessment. "You continue to surprise me, Cale." Before he could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Lyra was on her feet instantly, moving toward the command center with Cale, close behind. "Drift hunters," she said tersely as they reached the controls. "They've detected our passage." Through the viewport, Cale saw what appeared to be another vessel. Though vessel seemed an inadequate description for the writhing, geometric nightmare that pursued them. It seemed to fold in on itself impossibly, parts of its structure existing in dimensions his eyes couldn't properly process. "What are they?" "Scavengers evolved to exist within the drift. They hunt travelers, strip their vessels for technologies, and—" She hesitated. "Consume what remains." "Can we outrun them?" "Not conventionally." Her hands flew across the controls. "We'll need to dive deeper into the drift, use its currents against them. What followed was a chase sequence unlike anything Kale could have imagined. Lyra guided their ship through impossible passages, between layers of reality that folded and unfolded around them. The drift hunters pursued, their bizarre craft seeming to disassemble and reassemble as they navigated the same non-Euclidean geometries. "They're hurting us," Lyra said suddenly, her voice tight with concern. "Driving us toward a confluence point." What happens at a confluence point? Multiple drift currents intersect. The turbulence can tear a vessel apart or strand it permanently between states of reality. She shot him a quick glance. "I need your trust, Kale. What I'm about to do is unconventional." "You have it," he replied without hesitation. Lyra nodded, then closed her eyes. To Kale's astonishment, her skin began to glow with the same silvery luminescence as her eyes, fine traceries of light spreading across her features like circuitry. When she opened her eyes again, they blazed with power. "The ship's navigational systems are too limited," she explained, her voice taking on an ethereal quality. "I need to interface directly with the drift." She placed her hands on the control panel, and the light from her skin seemed to flow into the ship itself. The vessel shuddered, then accelerated with a surge of power Kale hadn't known it possessed. The viewports showed streams of impossible color rushing past as they plunged deeper into the drift than they had yet ventured. The hunters fell behind, unable or unwilling to follow where Lyra was taking them. But Kale could see the toll it was taking on her. Her face strained with concentration, beads of silver-tinged sweat forming on her brow. "Lyra, you're hurting yourself," he said, reaching toward her but afraid to break her concentration. "Necessary," she managed through gritted teeth. "Almost." Through. With a final surge, they broke free of the confluence, emerging into a relatively stable region of the drift. Lyra collapsed back in her seat, the glow fading from her skin. She looked exhausted, her breathing ragged. Kale moved to her side immediately, supporting her when she tried to rise. "You need rest." "No time," she insisted weakly. "The hunters will regroup. And we're close now. The Starheart's resonance is stronger here." Despite her protests, Kale helped her to her quarters. "I can monitor our position. You've taught me enough to recognize the basic patterns. Rest for at least a few hours." She looked as if she might argue further, then nodded reluctantly. "Wake me if anything changes. Anything at all." As Kale turned to leave, her hand caught his wrist. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For trusting me." Her eyes met his, unguarded for perhaps the first time since they'd met. Few would risk themselves so completely in the drift with only an oath-bound guide as protection. "You're more than that, Lyra," he replied quietly. "You always have been." Something unspoken passed between them in that moment. A recognition, perhaps, of how far they had both traveled from their first meeting in the arena. Then Lyra released his wrist, and Kale withdrew to the command center, his thoughts in turmoil. 3 subjective days later, they reached their destination. The Starheart, when it finally came into view, defied Kale's expectations. He had imagined something concrete, a star system, perhaps, or an artifact. Instead, what appeared before them was a vast, pulsating nexus of energy, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Streams of luminescent matter spiraled into a central point that seemed to both exist and not exist simultaneously. Colors shifted and changed in patterns that hinted at mathematical precision underlying the apparent chaos. It was as if they were witnessing the birth of a universe in miniature. Kale couldn't find words adequate to describe what he was seeing. "Beautiful," Lyra finished for him, fully recovered from her earlier exhaustion. The intersection of realities, where dimensional barriers are thinnest. They approached cautiously, Lyra guiding their vessel into a stable observation position at what she deemed a safe distance. "How do we harness it?" Kale asked, unable to tear his gaze from the spectacle. "How does this save my people?" Lyra's expression grew serious. "That's where complications arise. The Starheart's energy can be channeled, directed to rewrite matter at its fundamental level, including the pathogen afflicting your colony. but doing so requires a conduit. What kind of conduit? A living one. She met his gaze directly. An astrari. Me. The implications sank in slowly. You'd have to, what? Channel this energy through yourself? Is that even survivable? Traditionally, yes, though not without cost. She indicated faint markings on her skin that Kale had previously taken for decorative patterns. These are scars from previous channeling. Each time, a piece of the conduit's essence is consumed in the process. Kale shook his head. No, we'll find another way. I won't risk. It is not your decision to make, Lyra interrupted, a flash of her old, imperious manner returning. The oath compels me to assist you in reaching and utilizing the Starheart. This is the only method. Then I release you from that aspect of the oath, Kale said firmly. I commanded you to guide me here, not to sacrifice yourself. Lyra's expression softened unexpectedly. Your concern is noted, but unnecessary. I have channeled similar energies before, though never on the scale that would be required for your colony. I anticipate survival, just changed. Before Kale could respond, ship alarms blared again, proximity warnings. On the sensors, multiple contacts appeared, approaching rapidly from the direction they had come. Drift hunters? Kale asked, already moving to the weapon station. Worse. Lyra's voice was grim. Xylosian vessels. Vossen found us. Through the viewport, Kale could see them now. 3 ships of unfamiliar design, but clearly built for combat. Their hulls warping and realigning as they navigated the drift with unexpected proficiency. Ow! Kale demanded. How could they track us through the drift? Lyra's expression darkened. They must have another astrari. Probably one more deeply corrupted by the oath, used as a living navigation system. Her hands flew across the controls. We need to initiate the channeling process now, before they reach us. We're not prepared. You said it would take time to. Time we no longer have. She fixed him with an intense gaze. Kale, listen to me. The Starheart's energy, once channeled, will create a shockwave through the drift. It should disable or drive back the Xylosian vessels, giving us time to escape. And what will it do to you? Her silence was answer enough. No, Kale said firmly. We fight. We run. We find another solution. I didn't come all this way to save my people by sacrificing you. Something like wonder flickered across Lyra's features. You truly mean that? Of course I do. The words burst from him with unexpected force. Lyra, you're not a tool to be used and discarded. He hesitated, then pressed on. You've become important to me. More than the mission, more than the oath. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words, an unprecedented state for the normally composed warrior. Then her expression hardened with resolve. Then we fight, she agreed. But on my terms. Before Kale could ask what she meant, Lyra activated a sequence of commands on the ship's systems. A previously hidden compartment opened in the command center's floor, revealing what appeared to be ancient technology integrated with more modern components. What is that? A partial channeling array, Lyra explained, already connecting systems to the ship's power grid. I had it installed in secret years ago when I first learned of Vossen's plans for me. It will allow controlled access to the Starheart's energy without a full biological conduit. The pursuing ships were closing rapidly, the lead vessel already firing preliminary shots that distorted the drift around them. It won't have the power to save your colony, Lyra continued, working with urgent precision. But it should give us enough of an advantage to escape and find another solution. As she worked, Kale manned the ship's minimal defensive systems, trying to buy time. The Xylosian vessels were better armed, but their unfamiliarity with drift combat gave Kale small advantages he exploited ruthlessly. Almost ready, Lyra called. I'll need to initiate the sequence, but once it starts, you'll need to pilot us clear of the initial energy surge. Can you teach me the basics in the next 30 seconds? Kale asked, only half joking. No need. She tapped a final sequence. I've programmed an emergency exit trajectory. Just follow the navigation markers when they appear. The lead Xylosian vessel launched what appeared to be boarding craft. Small, agile ships designed to latch onto their hull. Kale targeted them with their remaining weapons, destroying two, but missing a third as it curved around in an impossible arc. "They're attempting to board," he warned. "Too late," Lyra replied with grim satisfaction as her improvised array hummed to life. Channeling initiated. Energy from the star heart, brilliant, multi-hued, and somehow alive, began to stream toward their vessel. The ship shuddered as the first tendrils made contact, systems fluctuating wildly as power levels spiked beyond design parameters. Lyra positioned herself before the array, arms outstretched. The energy flowed into her first, her body acting as a buffer between the raw power and the ship's more fragile systems. Her skin took on that now familiar silver glow, but magnified 100-fold, until Kale could barely look at her directly. "Lyra," he called out, alarmed by the intensity of the energy pouring into her. "I'm all right," she responded, her voice strangely echoed, as if multiple versions of her were speaking simultaneously. "Redirect power to weapons and shields." Quickly, Kale did as instructed and immediately felt the difference. Their shields solidified into something far beyond their original specifications, taking on a pearlescent quality that deflected the Xylosian weapons with ease. Their own weapons systems, previously defensive at best, now pulsed with devastating potential. With a thought more than a command, Kale targeted the nearest boarding craft. Their weapons fired. Not conventional energy beams, but concentrated streams of the same multicolored energy flowing through Lyra. The boarding craft didn't so much explode as simply cease to exist, the space it had occupied folding in on itself. "The navigation markers are active," Lyra called, her voice growing strained. "I can't maintain this channeling much longer without risking permanent damage." The promised markers appeared on the view screen, a series of glowing waypoints leading away from the star heart along a trajectory Kale would never have attempted under normal circumstances. It seemed to lead directly toward a particularly turbulent region of the drift. "That route looks problematic," he observed, even as he began maneuvering toward it. "Trust me," Lyra replied simply. A massive explosion rocked their ship. One of the Xylosian vessels had sacrificed itself, detonating some kind of reality-warping device that disrupted their shields momentarily. Warning indicators flashed across every console. "Hull breach on lower deck," Kale reported, fighting to maintain their course. "Irrelevant. Keep to the markers." As they approached the first waypoint, the turbulence around them increased dramatically. The ship groaned under stresses it was never designed to withstand. Kale's piloting skills were pushed to their absolute limits as he navigated the increasingly chaotic conditions. "Almost there," Lyra encouraged, though her voice had taken on a worrying, ethereal quality. The energy flowing through her was beginning to show signs of instability, arcs of power lashing out unpredictably. Another hit from the pursuing vessels sent them spinning off course. Kale fought the controls, trying to compensate, but the ship's systems were becoming unresponsive. "We're losing structural integrity," he warned. "The hull can't take much more." Lyra made a decision then, one Kale immediately recognized and feared. With a fluid motion, she stepped fully into the channeling array, allowing the Starheart's energy to flow through her without the buffers and limiters she had established. "Lyra, no!" Kale shouted, but it was too late. The power surged, radiant energy streaming from her eyes, her mouth, from every pore of her being. The ship's systems responded instantly, repairing themselves, power levels stabilizing, drives engaging with renewed force. They accelerated toward the final waypoint, leaving the Xylosian vessels scrambling to pursue. But the cost was written clearly on Lyra's face. Pain and determination warring for control as the energy consumed her from within. She was sacrificing herself, exactly as Kale had feared she would. "Enough," he cried, abandoning the controls to move toward her. "Lyra, stop. We'll find another way." "Too late," she gasped, her voice barely recognizable. "Complete." The trajectory, the final waypoint, loomed before them. a swirling vortex in the fabric of the drift itself. With no one at the controls, the ship began to drift off course, the automated systems insufficient for the precision required. Kale was torn. Return to the controls and complete their escape, or try to pull Lyra from the channeling array before it consumed her completely. In that moment of indecision, something unexpected happened. The boarding craft that had attached to their hull finally breached the inner doors. But instead of Xylosian troops, a single figure stumbled into the command center, tall, rail-thin, and instantly recognizable. Hierarch Vossen. Kale breathed, reaching for a weapon. The Hierarch looked nothing like the composed, imperious figure from the arena. His clothing was torn, his skin pale and drawn, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and avarice as they fixed on Lyra's glowing form. "The power," he rasped, staggering forward. "All this time, searching. It will be mine." He lunged not at Kale, but at the channeling array, his hands outstretched toward the streams of energy flowing through Lyra. The moment he made contact, the energy reacted violently. A blast of power erupted from the point of contact, throwing Vossen back against the bulkhead with bone-crushing force. Simultaneously, the ship lurched as the energy flow destabilized completely. Alarms blared throughout the vessel as systems overloaded. Kale had seconds to make a decision. He dove for the controls, correcting their course toward the vortex waypoint with one hand while reaching for Lyra with the other. His fingers brushed hers, charged with energy that sent pain lancing up his arm, but he didn't let go. "Come back to me," he pleaded, holding on to her even as the energy burned through him. "Lyra, please." Something in his voice seemed to reach her. The silver glow in her eyes flickered, humanity returning momentarily as she recognized him. With tremendous effort, she began to pull away from the channeling array, fighting the energy that had nearly consumed her. The ship entered the vortex just as Lyra collapsed into Kale's arms, the channeling connection broken. The last thing Kale saw before consciousness left him was the drift folding in on itself behind them, sealing off the pursuing vessels, and Vossen's broken form dissolving into motes of light. Then there was only darkness. Kale awoke to the gentle hum of ship systems operating on minimal power. His body ached as if he'd been beaten, and his right arm, the one that had reached for Lyra, was wrapped in some kind of regenerative bandage. Remembering, he sat up with a jolt. "Lyra, here." Her voice came from nearby, weaker than he'd ever heard it. She sat in the pilot's seat, monitoring the controls with obvious effort. Her appearance had changed. Her once silver skin now bore intricate patterns that glowed faintly with residual energy from the Starheart. Her eyes, when she turned to him, still held their luminescence, but it was subdued, controlled. "You're alive," he breathed, relief flooding through him. "As are you, against considerable odds." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. The channeling should have killed anyone attempting to interrupt it. Kale looked down at his bandaged arm. "It nearly did." "Not the channeling," Lyra corrected gently. "My attempt to save you from it." Kale struggled to understand. "What happened? Where are we?" "We're back in normal space, approximately 3 systems from your colony. The vortex was a drift exit I had programmed as an emergency measure." She gestured to the viewports, which showed familiar stars. "Vossen is dead, consumed by energy he sought to control but could never understand. His vessels remained trapped in the drift when the exit point collapsed behind us." "And the Starheart? Did we?" "We have a fragment." She indicated a small containment unit humming quietly in the corner. "A portion of its energy was captured during the channeling process. Not as much as I had hoped, but perhaps enough." Kale moved carefully to her side, mindful of his injuries. "Will it be enough to save my people?" "I believe so." She met his gaze. "But the method of delivery has changed. I cannot channel it as I intended. The damage from even that brief connection was significant." For the first time, Kale noticed the cost of what she had done. Beneath the glowing patterns, her skin was marked with fine lines, as if she had aged decades and days. Her movements, once fluid and precise, now carried a subtle tremor. "What did it cost you?" he asked quietly. "Less than it would have," she replied with surprising gentleness. "Thanks to you." Silence fell between them, filled with things neither quite knew how to express. Finally, Cale spoke. "The oath. Is it still? Are you still bound?" Lyra considered the question, her head tilting in that characteristic way. "Yes and no. The oath itself remains, but it has been transformed. When you reached for me in the channeling chamber, prioritizing my life over your mission, you fundamentally altered our compact." She held out her hand, palm up. Faint lines of silver energy traced across it, forming patterns similar to those now marking her skin. The ancient oath was meant to ensure Astrari powers served worthy purposes. You proved your worthiness not through combat, but through compassion, through choosing a person over power. A genuine smile touched her lips. "The traditions of my people would say, I'm still bound to you, but no. Longer as master and servant, as equals, partners in purpose." Cale took her offered hand, careful of his bandaged arm. "And what would you say?" "I would say," she hesitated, then continued with newfound certainty, "that I choose to remain with you, not because of any oath, but because I wish to." The journey to Cale's colony took 9 days at their damaged vessel's maximum speed. They spent the time healing, repairing critical systems, and developing a method to safely distribute the Starheart's energy to counteract the pathogen. When they finally arrived, the situation was more dire than Cale had feared. Nearly half the colony's children were in critical condition, the adults showing advancing symptoms, and essential systems failing under the strain of constant emergency operations. Dr. Eleanor Vega, the colony's chief medical officer, greeted them with exhausted skepticism when they explained their solution. "You're telling me this energy can rewrite the pathogen at a molecular level?" she asked, studying the containment unit with bloodshot eyes. "Based on what evidence?" "The properties of the Starheart energy allow it to establish template patterns across dimensional boundaries," Lyra explained patiently. "It can effectively reset biological structures to their uncontaminated state." Vega looked to Cale. "You believe this will work?" "I stake my life on it," he replied without hesitation. "We both do." After extensive testing on isolated samples, they began treatment with the most critical patients, children who had hours, not days, remaining. The results were immediate and stunning. As the carefully modulated energy washed over them, the gray pallor of their skin receded, vital signs stabilized, and neural patterns returned to normal ranges. Within a week, every colonist had been treated, and the pathogen had been purged not just from the people, but from the colony's environment as well. The remaining Starheart energy was integrated into the life support systems, creating a sustainable defense against any recurrence. In the aftermath, as the colony celebrated its salvation, Cale found Lyra standing alone on an observation platform, looking out at the stars. "The Hierarch's ship has been repurposed," he said as he joined her. "The colonists are calling it the Starheart vessel now. They want to use it to establish better trade routes, maybe even relocate to a more hospitable planet eventually." Lyra nodded, her luminescent eyes reflecting the starlight. "A worthy purpose. They want us to lead the expedition." She turned to him then, searching his face. "Us, if you want to," Cale said carefully. "They need a pilot who understands deep space navigation, and I'd be chief engineer. We'd be equals, partners, and if I wish to go elsewhere, to seek out others of my kind, perhaps, then I'd wish you well," Cale replied, though the words cost him. "You're free to choose your path, Lyra. That was always the goal." She studied him for a long moment, then reached out to touch his face gently. "What if my chosen path is with you? Not because of the oath, transformed or otherwise, but because of this." Her hand moved to rest over his heart. Cale covered her hand with his own. "Then I'd be the most fortunate man in the galaxy." "Not fortune," Lyra corrected with a smile that transformed her features. "Choice. Mine and yours." Under the stars, they sealed that choice with a kiss. No longer champion and victor, master and servant, but two people who had found each other against impossible odds, bound not by ancient oaths, but by something far more powerful: love freely given and received. 3 months later, the newly christened Starheart vessel departed the colony, carrying supplies, colonists seeking new opportunities, and its two commanders, Kale and Lyra, standing together on the bridge as they charted a course into the unknown. As the stars stretched before them, Lyra looked to Kale with silver eyes that held both wisdom and wonder. "Where shall we go first?" Kale smiled, taking her hand. "Wherever we choose. Together."